2020 president of the AALS. I'm also the dean at UIC John Marshall Law School. I now call to order the meeting of the 2021 House of Representatives of the Association of American Law Schools. Serving as our parliamentarian for this 2021 session of the House is Elizabeth Ginger Patterson of Georgetown Law Center. Thank you, Ginger, for being with us. Also joining us today is my successor as president, Dean Vincent Rougeau of Boston College Law School. Welcome, Vincent. I am especially pleased to welcome representatives from our 176 member schools. Normally, delegates vote for the president-elect and executive committee nominees in person during the House of Representatives meeting. But this past year has been anything but normal. For this year only, we asked delegates to vote by electronic ballot ahead of today's meeting as authorized by DC Code Section 19405.09 sub A. In addition to voting on the ballot, we asked delegates to suspend the rules of procedure for the 2021 virtual annual meeting because they do not envision a virtual meeting. Section 3.2 of the bylaws of the association provides that a quorum of the House of Representatives consists of representatives from a majority of the member schools. I can report that representatives from 123 member schools submitted electronic ballots, which means that a quorum of our member schools voted for the nominees for the executive committee and president-elect. The agenda for this meeting of the 2021 House of Representatives follows the same order as the agenda for the 2020 meeting of the House of Representatives. We will begin with a report of my year as president. We will then proceed to recognize this year's Order of the Coif Book Award winner, memorialize the law professors who died in 2020, hear the address by AALS President-elect Vincent Rougeau on his plans for 2021, receive a report from the Committee on Nominations, and announce the results of the vote on the Executive Committee nominations. Now for my brief remarks on this year. Stated simply, 2020 was not the year that I or anyone else expected it to be. Since January 4th, 2020, when I last addressed this group, we've lived through a deadly worldwide pandemic that caused all of legal education to pivot to online learning and operations. Witnessed the murders of too many Black and brown individuals that spurred a global movement for racial justice and anti-racism. Experienced a stock market crash and global recession. Many of our members suffered through the devastating West Coast wildfires. We witnessed a presidential impeachment, the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who joined us here at last year's meeting and was so inspirational. We saw the presidential election, and just this week, an insurrection at the Capitol triggered by the words of the sitting president. The theme for this conference is the power of words. The fact that Wednesday's insurrection was triggered by the words of the current president reinforced that proposition. Words have power. As I stated last year in my presidential remarks, words can inspire social movements, evoke emotions, and create allegiances. They can help and they can heal. But like many tools, words can be wielded as weapons to hurt and hinder and to mislead and manipulate. Words translate our imagination. They can form bridges to connect us and walls that divide us. Words can comfort us and isolate us, empower and belittle. As lawyers, let us remember and use the power of words to uphold the rule of law. Let us also foster civil discourse and promote civic engagement so more citizens understand how our government is structured and function. Let us use our words to educate people about the difference between facts and opinions. Let us also continue to use our words to fight racism, seek social justice, and break down caste. The AALS has met the challenges of 2020 under the outstanding leadership of Executive Director Judy Arain. And the AALS staff have been simply amazing. I was with them in the spring, one of the first times that they ever used Zoom. And now they've become so accomplished and successful that they have produced our largest annual meeting ever with more than 5,100 attendees and the finest virtual conference that I've attended in 2020 or 2021. To Tracy, Mary, Hannah, and all of the staff, I am in awe of what you have accomplished this year and with this conference in particular. The AALS also worked hard to serve law schools and law professors with programs such as the weekly Dean's Dialogues that kept law school deans up to date and connected, and the Faculty Focus webinar series to assist early career faculty with special challenges they've faced this year. Our section stepped up and put on a wide range of amazing programming, both here at the conference and throughout 2020. In addition to these new efforts, the AALS completed all of its regular work without missing a beat. It has been my great honor to serve as your 2020 president, and I want to conclude with a few other thank yous. To the AALS Executive Committee, with the special thanks to outgoing members Mark Alexander and Jillian Lester. You provided wise counsel and generated creative ideas that helped our organization thrive. And among the many accomplishments, you approved a new strategic framework for the organization. To everyone who served on a committee or led a section and kept the work of the AALS going, thank you. I wish I could have thanked you all in person and hope to see you in New York City next year. A very special thanks to Kirsten Davis, Chair of the Program Committee for this annual meeting, and to the committee members, Dan Filler, Jonathan Glader, and Mara Stith McLeod. Thank you for selecting so many outstanding sessions for us. To my university, the University of Illinois Chicago, thank you for understanding my dual responsibilities in this particularly challenging year. To the members of the Legal Writing Committee, thank you for inspiring this year's theme. To everyone who participated in the conference, thank you for giving this format a chance, and thank you for your fellowship ideas and positivity. And to the 2021 AALS President, Vince Rougeau, you've been a terrific partner this year, and I look forward to working with you to support you during your year as president. Normally, we would next hear the report of the AALS Executive Director, Judy Arain, who's also a former AALS president and for 15 years served as Executive Vice President for Law Affairs of Georgetown University and Dean at Georgetown Law Center. She's been the association's executive director since 2014. In recognition of the time constraints on this year's virtual meeting, her report will be written and published in the next issue of the AALS News. Our next order of business is to recognize this year's winner of the Order of the Coif Book Award. Joining us now to announce this year's winner is the chair of the Order of the Coif Committee, Judith Resnick, the Arthur Lyman Professor of Law at Yale Law School. Judith?
Thank you. And I immediately need to also just join you in the applause for both AALS staff and all the tech support, and also to thank you for helping us have a semblance of normalcy, Zoom being normal now, in a world that is so abnormal and where so much destruction, personal and institutional, is about us. So thanks to you all from a member. I have the pleasure, I chair a committee, and the other members were Bertrand Ross from Berkeley, Kate Andreas from Michigan, Steve Laddick from Texas, Fumi Aoya from Temple. We are the Coif Committee and had the pleasure of being a great book reading group for the last couple years. And for 2019, Coif has innovated, as ALS has in many ways, and we have two awards to announce. One is the honorary mention, which I will just mention very briefly. Democratic Equality by James Lindsay Wilson is an all too apt book. that he's a University of Chicago political science professor right now, and it is asking the question about the relationship between what is political equality, what its relationship is to democracy, what are the forms of political authority that people have to have access to in order to have political equality, and in this moment, as in startlingly apt, and so we commend it to you. The second book, which is the awardee, goes to Professor Sarah Seo, who is here and who you'll hear more from in a second. I have a less snazzy example. It's available on Witness COVID and printing, but it's a terrific book called Policing the Open Road, How Cars Transformed American Freedom. And I just want to flag that it's a tour de force, and that word I picked on purpose because it explores how the invention of the automobile, imagined to be a new form of freedom, turned out to be a conduit, a vehicle, if you will, for policing, and therefore the source of a vast amount of U.S. constitutional law about what constitutes a reason for policing and when is deference appropriate. So again, this week, in addition to all the other weeks, utterly relevant to our current moment. Professor Seo mixes sociology, history, law, some great photography and legal analysis to help us understand more. And so I'm honored and delighted on behalf of COIF to shout out Professor Seo, who will give us a much snazzier version of her book in a very brief comment. And thank AALS for integrating us into this moment as well.
Thank you, Judith, for those really kind words. I'm so grateful for this honor. And I'd also like to thank the many institutions and individuals that have supported me and this project. But given the short time that I have, I'll just mention two. First, Iowa Law School, where I taught during the years I worked on this book, and Columbia Law School, where I was in residence while finishing the manuscript. Both institutions provided crucial support and an intellectually generous environment, and I couldn't have been luckier. And as a lucky recipient of this prize, I get to tell you a little bit about my book, which centers on a paradox. Cars symbolized freedom in 20th century American culture. My favorite example here is the Dodge commercial with the tagline, "Americans got two things right, freedom and cars." This symbolism was forged from the very early years of the automobile as mass production democratized mobility. As you can see from this 1911 advertisement, the car was for every man. According to Ford Motor Company, women could also experience the freedom of automobility, which was happening even before they gained the right to vote. But the automobile is also a site of extensive regulation and control in American life. All too familiar now is how a minor traffic violation can lead to intrusive, even abusive policing, especially for people of color. The regulation of cars began early on when their mass adoption created havoc on public streets and highways. Cars gave new meaning to the word traffic. This is a traffic jam in Detroit in the early 1920s. They could also be deadly, as this headline from the New York Times in 1924 shows. From 1913 to 1932, death from car accidents went up 500%, while other deaths decreased by 42%. So volumes of traffic laws were passed to deal with these catastrophes and traffic. But the problem was that everybody, including the everyman, violated these laws. The response to this law enforcement challenge required a shift from 19th century forms of governance that depended on individual reasonableness and honor, like common law torts and voluntary associations, to 20th century policing. This billboard in California perfectly captures this shift in governance. In other words, I argue that how towns and cities throughout the United States responded to the problem of automobile traffic explains key aspects of modern policing today, including the police's vast discretionary power. Because because of the automobile, most Americans would experience police discretion during a traffic stop, even the everyman who had previously been shielded from policing because of their class and race. And these are pictures from early traffic stops from the 1910s and 20s. By mid-century, more and more people were beginning to question American freedom after they encountered the police in their cars, including the author of this letter to the ACLU, asking if his rights were violated during a traffic stop. The automobile paradox raises a question. How did the meaning of freedom change in the 20th century, such that Americans came to expect and even accept a great deal of policing in the very symbol of their freedom? We tend to understand freedom and policing as opposites, that the defense of liberty is about restraining the police's power. But the history of cars shows that when American society turned to the police to maintain highway safety and order, the challenge was to figure out how to incorporate policing within the meaning of freedom itself. As my book explains, the resolution to this challenge, that is, the solution to every man's problem of arbitrary policing, exacerbated the more specific problem of discriminatory policing of minorities, a consequence that we're still grappling with today. Thank you again for this honor, and now I'll turn it over back to Darby.
Thank you, Judith, and congratulations, Sarah. Thank you for the book and that wonderful summary. I now call upon our Executive Director, Judy Areen, to honor our law faculty colleagues who died during this past year. Judy?
Thank you, Darby. Last year, we added an in memoriam section to the AALS website to honor throughout the year the colleagues who had died since the last annual meeting. Their names will be shown in a moment on a screen. Each of you will recognize a number of these individuals. In some cases, they were your teachers, your peers, or your colleagues. Many others of us will know them through their service to their law schools and to the law teaching profession. Even more of us will recognize them from their scholarship. Please join us now in honoring the individuals we lost from legal education since our last annual meeting. We're having a little delay. I'm sure our technical staff are ready to put up the list for us now.
This is the address of AALS President-elect Dean Vincent Rougeau of Boston College Law School. It is customary for the President-elect to address this body about his aspirations for the association and legal education during the coming year. Although Vince is well known to many of you, I'd like to highlight some of his many accomplishments. Vince has been Dean of Boston College Law School since 2011. He received his AB magna cum laude from Brown University in 1985 and his JD in 1988 from Harvard Law School, where he was the articles editor of the Harvard Human Rights Journal. Vince practiced law at Morrison & Foerster before joining Loyola University Chicago School of Law from 1991 to 1998. He then served as a professor of law at Notre Dame from 1998 to 2011. He also served as Associate Dean of Academic Affairs there from 1999 to 2002. At Boston College, he has helped to reorganize leadership to improve student services and support a more diverse student body through the improvement and expansion of organizations like BC Law's Center for Experiential Learning and the Global Practice Program. Vince has been involved with the AALS in several capacities, including as a member of the Executive Committee from 2016 to 2019. He previously served as chair of the AALS Dean's Forum Steering Committee. He also served on the planning committee for the 2018 Dean's Forum program at the AALS annual meeting. AALS is fortunate to have a person of Vince's depth of experience, sound judgment, and many accomplishments to assume the presidency. Dean Vince Rougeau will now deliver his presidential address.
Thank you, Darby. I'm very honored to be stepping into this position on the heels of your distinguished service. Thank you for your inspired leadership of the AALS in 2020, which, as you mentioned in your remarks, certainly was not the year that you had anticipated. You did an outstanding job under the most difficult of circumstances. In addition, I want to thank the members of the Executive Committee with whom I have worked over the past 5 years. It has been a privilege working with all of you, and please know how much I value your collegiality and wisdom. I also want to extend my deep appreciation to the AALS staff. Your hard work every day behind the scenes is what allows us to host these successful conferences year after year. You are an incredible team, and I look forward to our continued work together. Of course, all of this great work is accomplished under the extraordinary leadership of AALS Executive Director, Judy Areen. Judy, please accept my heartfelt thanks for your inspired vision. You have been a transformative figure for this organization, and I'm looking forward to accomplishing great things with you in 2021. Finally, I want to thank all my colleagues at BC Law for their patience, encouragement, and support. And last, but certainly not least, thank you to my wonderful wife, Dr. Robin Cornegay Rougeau, who's been my loving companion, my most trusted confidant, and my rock. Throughout its history, the AALS has risen to respond to numerous challenges posed by significant cultural, economic, and political moments in our nation's history. This year's annual meeting has occurred at another one of those times. When I sat down to write these remarks, I was thinking about the significance of our gathering in the first virtual annual meeting in the association's history, an extraordinary rethinking and reworking of this event brought on by the coronavirus pandemic that has ravaged the globe for the past year. Despite the hopeful arrival of vaccines in recent weeks, we currently find ourselves in one of the worst surges of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths since the pandemic began. But during the meeting itself, yet another event has occurred that has left us all shocked and shaken, and asking ourselves how this nation will move forward after we have witnessed an event of domestic terrorism in which a mob of our fellow citizens attempted to prevent the certification of the presidential election results by Congress through a violent invasion of the US Capitol. What is worse, this desecration of the people's house had the full knowledge and support of the President of the United States, and arguably it occurred at his behest. Vaccines now give us hope that COVID-19 will slowly allow us to return to many of our old routines, and most important, reunite us with loved ones and friends from whom we have been physically distanced, from whom we distance ourselves for the last year. But there is no vaccine that will protect us from the enemies of democracy, who exist both around us and amongst us. We now are fully aware that, for better or worse, the world we knew before the pandemic and the attack on our capital is a vestige of a different time. These realities resonate with me deeply as I announced my theme for the AALS in 2021, which is freedom, equality, and the common good. As we emerge from the pandemic and begin to address the social, economic, and political turmoil left in its wake, I believe this is the right time to explore these three concepts, critical to our understanding of democracy and the rule of law. It is my hope that this theme will offer all of you an opportunity from the perspective of your own areas of specialty to consider how our legal system will engage the realities of a post-pandemic world. Let's begin by thinking about freedom. The past year has shown us that crafting a common understanding of what freedom means in a democratic society can be very complicated, particularly in the face of a crisis. In his November 2020 speech to the Federalist Society, Justice Alito asked a critically important question. What does the pandemic mean for the future of the rule of law? Although not diminishing the extraordinary threat COVID-19 posed to public health, he declared that the pandemic had, quote, resulted in previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty, unquote. And he noted that the COVID crisis had served as a sort of constitutional stress test that has highlighted disturbing trends that were already present before the virus struck. He went on to discuss a variety of potential challenges he saw to freedom in the United States, including the aggressive use of executive power employed by many state governors to sweeping public health restrictions during the pandemic, many of which, in his view, threatened to compromise core constitutional freedoms of religion, association, and speech. Yet while some have seen these actions as threats to our cherished freedoms through government overreach, we also have witnessed individual citizens, many acting in the name of exercising their freedom, ignore government-imposed restrictions such as mask wearing and in-person gathering limits, resulting in an explosion of virus infections, hospitalizations, and deaths that have fallen disproportionately on the elderly, those of low and moderate income, and communities of color. When we think about our freedom to act as we please and our right to be free from unreasonable government restraints on our actions, what role should countervailing responsibilities to our fellow citizens play in striking the balance? How can a democracy survive without empathy, mutual respect, and compassion? This brings me to the issue of equality and the struggles we face to realize its meaning. One of the bedrocks of equality in a modern democracy is universal suffrage. Our most recent presidential election saw the highest voter turnout in a century, a milestone to celebrate and a sign of tremendous citizen interest in the future of our nation. We also saw, unfortunately, some of the most brazen attempts at voter suppression since the Jim Crow era, this time on a national scale. Yet not even a violent attempt to subvert the will of the people through an act of insurrection prevented 147 members of the US Congress to the certification of the people's vote for president, based on spurious allegations of widespread voter fraud. The visible expression of the democratic value of equality, represented in the broad availability of the franchise, is still a contested notion in this country. And it is inextricably linked to our history of slavery and white supremacy. A once-in-a-century pandemic could not suppress the symptoms of America's chronic racism, and the most recent outbreak of this disease has the nation unlike anything we have seen in a very long time. During 2020, we were reminded yet again through numerous brutal killings of Black men and women by the police that our striving for racial justice has been insufficient and remains incomplete. Just a few days ago, we learned that no charges would be brought against the Kenosha, Wisconsin police officer who shot Jacob Blake in the back multiple times as he moved away. And questions now rage about the tepid police response to the overwhelmingly white mob that breached the Capitol. The issue of race reminds us repeatedly that democracy and the rule of law in America are still deeply compromised by structural racism. Indeed, in a recent traditional understandings of how we think about race in the United States, Isabel Wilkerson has suggested that the quest for racial justice and equality in this society has been disfigured by the endurance of a status-based economic and social order that cannot be undone by on individual rights and freedoms, but is better understood through the concept of inequality continues to persist in a society where other forms of inequality have hardened and remained unaddressed. The data demonstrating the lack of social mobility and the chasm of income inequality in the United States continue to mount and are impossible to ignore or explain away. The richest 0.1% of American households have the combined worth of the bottom 85%. And that same group controls close to 20% of the nation's total wealth. According to the World Economic Forum, in 2020, the United States ranked 27th in the world for social mobility. Of the G7 nations, only Italy ranked lower at 34. The US performs poorly relative to its economic peers in any number of other measures, including life expectancy, the percentage of children living in single-parent households, and educational outcomes. Life has gotten demonstrably worse for most Americans over the past 40 years. Consequently, we should not at all be surprised that we are seeing a surge in the appeal of authoritarianism, nationalism, and xenophobia, and an outburst of acts of mayhem and violence. As Michael Sandel has argued, for most people in this country, the American dream may well be best described as a noble lie, a belief, though untrue, that sustains civic harmony by inducing citizens to accept certain inequalities as legitimate. Problem is, the facts on the ground are becoming too obvious to ignore, even for those who want desperately to believe otherwise. We all know that rampant inequality is an enemy of democracy. So if we care about the future of our republic, what to do about it? One possible approach might be to turn our attention to the concept of the common good. Democracies of the modern era, the United States and France, share many things, and both have served as inspirations to countries around the world as they formed new legal systems and democratic governments. Both democracies sprang from what were in the century radical ideals, and from revolutions that both broke explicitly with the old order of aristocratic hierarchy inherited. But one critical part of the French Republican tradition that the United States does not share, the constitutional principle of fraternity. The most widely known recent expression of this concept in French law was in 2018, when olive farmer Cédric Héroux was protected from prosecution after being charged with smuggling undocumented migrants across the French-Italian border. The French Constitutional Court ruled that Héroux had acted within his rights as a French citizen, noting that, quote, the principle of fraternity confers the freedom to help others for humanitarian purposes, regardless of the legality of their presence on national territory. Another way of thinking about fraternity is through the concepts of social friendship and the common good. As a global religious leader, Pope Francis has emphasized these ideas and has made significant efforts to reach out to other faith leaders around the globe who share them. In a recent encyclical he addressed to all people of goodwill, he highlighted the inspiration for its writing that he gained from his meetings with Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew and Grand Imam Ahmed Al-Tayyib, and he offered a rich way of thinking about fraternity for democratic societies in a globalized world. And here I quote, fraternity is born not only of a climate of respect for individual liberties, or even of a certain administratively guaranteed equality. Fraternity necessarily calls for something greater, which in turn enhances freedom and equality. Nor is equality achieved by an abstract proclamation that all men are. Instead, it is the result of the conscious and careful cultivation of fraternity. The mere sum of individual interests is not capable of generating a better world for the whole human family, nor can it save us from the many ills that are now increasingly globalized. Individualism is a virus that is extremely difficult to eliminate, for it is clever. It makes us believe that everything consists in giving free rein to our own ambitions, as if by pursuing ever greater ambitions and creating safety nets, we would somehow be serving the common good. Social friendship and universal fraternity necessarily call for an acknowledgement of the worth of every human person, always and everywhere. People have this right even if they are unproductive or were born with or developed limitations. This does not detract from their great dignity as human persons, a dignity based not on circumstances, but on the intrinsic worth of their being. Unless this basic principle is upheld, there will be no future either for fraternity or for the survival of humanity, unquote. A democracy cannot function on notions of freedom and equality that prioritize individual autonomy over those aspects of our humanity that may make us weak or dependent or enrich us through our lives in community with others. We cannot construct a political and legal system that fails to understand us as persons and as citizens who are embedded in and ennobled by our relationships with our families, friends, neighbors, colleagues, and fellow citizens. Freedom and equality are inextricable from a meaningful engagement with the common good. So, as I proudly assume the presidency of the AALS, challenge my friends and colleagues in the American Legal Academy. What have we learned from this year of pandemic and this week's violent attempt to rob the American people of the right to choose their leaders? What does it all mean for the work we will do as teachers and scholars going forward? How might we reimagine how freedom, equality, and the common good can join together to strengthen democracy and the rule of law in the years to come? I have every confidence that you will offer some compelling and inspired answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince, for those inspiring remarks. Your remarks will appear in the next issue of the AALS News, which will be distributed to all law teachers in the first quarter of 2021. As we near the end of today's meeting, Dean Rougeau will assume the presidency of the association, and 2 executive committee members will conclude their service. Mark Alexander, Dean of Villanova University School of Law, and Jillian Lester, Dean of Columbia Law School. On behalf of the association, I want to emphasize that each has made extraordinary contributions to the work of the AALS. I extend my heartfelt and sincere thanks to you for your exceptional service, both to the AALS and to legal education. I'd like each of you to know how much I've enjoyed working with you. I now recognize Wendy Perdue, Dean at the University of Richmond School of Law and Chair of the Nominating Committee for 2021 officers and members of the Executive Committee, to present the committee's nominations for the 2021 President-elect and for 2 positions on the Executive Committee. Wendy?
President Dickerson, I'm privileged to present the report of the Nominating Committee. My colleagues on the Nominating Committee are Jessica Berg, Case Western Reserve University School of Law, Paul Marcus, William & Mary Law School, Blake Morant, the George Washington University Law School, and Alicia Ouellette, Albany Law School. Memorandum 20-07, dated October 22nd, 2020, was sent to deans and members of the 2021 House of Representatives. The memorandum contains biographical sketches of the nominees, which I will only highlight here. As was said in our written report, the nominations we received from faculty members and deans at AALS Member Schools provided us with a rich and accomplished field of potential nominees that made our task very challenging. We were proud to recommend to the House 3 truly outstanding individuals. Each of them has also engaged in significant service to the AALS. For the office of President-elect of the Association of American Law Schools, we nominate Dean Erwin Chemerinsky of the University of California, Berkeley School of Law.
Thank you, Dean Perdue. No other nominations were received for the position of President-elect by December 5, 2020. Therefore, as specified in our bylaw section 5.1D, I hereby declare the nominations closed as of that day. I'm pleased to announce that Erwin Chemerinsky was selected as president-elect via electronic ballot by our House of Representatives members. Congratulations, Dean Chemerinsky. Dean Perdue, do you have further nominations?
Yes, President Dickerson, we present 2 further nominations. For the 2 3-year terms on the Executive Committee, we placed into nomination Dean Dan Filler of Drexel University Thomas R. Klein School of Law and Dean Danielle Conway of the Pennsylvania State University Dickinson Law.
Thank you, Dean Perdue. No other nominations were received for these positions by December 5th, 2020. Therefore, as specified in our bylaws, I declare the nominations were closed as of that day. I am pleased to announce that both of these members, Dean Conway and Dean Filler, were elected by the representatives of this House. Congratulations, Deans Conway and Dean Filler. I look forward to working with you on the Executive Committee. Dean Perdue, do you have a further motion?
No, President Dickerson, this concludes the report of the nominating committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Perdue. On behalf of all of us, on behalf of legal education, I again extend congratulations to Deans Chemerinsky, Filler, and Conway. We are fortunate that you have agreed to serve legal education in these significant roles. It is a special honor to welcome you, Erwin, in your new role as AALS President-elect, a role that you will assume at the conclusion of this meeting. Along with my colleagues on the Executive Committee, I look forward to working with you again because you've served a prior term on that committee. The act of electing a new president-elect and 2 new members of the Executive Committee concludes my official duties. Thus, I am honored now to relinquish the chair to the new president of the Association of American Law Schools, Vincent Rucho.
Thank you, Darby. Let me add my congratulations to the newly elected members of the Executive Committee and to my successor as president-elect, Erwin Chemerinsky. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Darby Dickerson. As we've said, this past year has been an exceptionally challenging one for the AALS president, and we have been truly fortunate to have had the benefit of Darby's steady hand and wise judgment. Darby, thank you for your leadership. The AALS has received no requests for other business for this session of the House of Representatives. Therefore, I declare this meeting of the House of Representatives adjourned. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to working during my term as AALS president. Have a great afternoon.